Okay, we're going to revisit graphing linear equations. So the first thing that I want to take a look at is back to the actual equation for slope-intercept form. So when we have lines that where we have the slope and we have the y-intercept, you'll usually see it in the slope-intercept form. So what I want to do is just focus for another second on the m and the b. The m is our slope. Okay, which is our rate of change. And it's how we move. It's the movement. Okay, let me change that. It's the movement, but actually what I want you to do instead is write the word move. And I'll explain that again in just a minute. So write the word move and put some sort of little circle or bubble around it. Our B is our y-intercept. The ordered pair is 0, B. That's not a 6, that's a B. And write the word begin. So as a review, the B, our y-intercept, is where we begin our graph. Okay, so you can think B is where we begin. The slope is the pattern of our line. It's the way the line changes. It's how we move from the y-intercept. Okay, so the move indicates how we move from the y-intercept. We can even add pattern. Okay. So let's take a look at some steps for graphing. Okay, we did a little bit yesterday. Some people make sense. Some people still need a little practice. And you do have some steps, but I want you to write in these blank lines. We're going to kind of take the steps and make them as simple as possible. So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify the slope and the y-intercept. Okay, so that's the first thing. Identify your slope, identify your y-intercept. Writing them down or identifying them in the equation somehow is a really good way to focus yourself, to stay organized. And double check that you're correct. Then we're going to plot the y-intercept. Sorry, I got a little fuzzy there. So plot the y-intercept. So once we plot the y-intercept, that's where we begin. That's the B. The B is the beginning. So we plot the y-intercept, and then we have to use the slope to find the next point. The M can remind us it's where we move to get the next point. So use the slope to find the next point. Last thing we do is all we need are 2 points to make a line. We now have a second point. Okay, the y-intercept gives us the first point. Using the slope gets us the next point. Connect the points to make a line. All right, let's go ahead straight into an example. So example 1, y equals 4/3 x minus 3. So the first thing I'll do is I'm actually going to rewrite this, adding the opposite, because remember we want y equals mx plus b. The chances of having an error if you don't add the opposite when you're determining your y-intercept is huge. Then I'm going to identify my slope is 4/3. My y-intercept is -3. Okay, so B is our beginning. It's where we're going to begin our graph. Okay, the y-intercept always represents the starting point. So my y-intercept, or my B, is -3. Then I'm going to use my slope to help me find the next point. Now I'm adding some extra notes, and you can add these to your paper if you would like. Don't forget that our slope is a rise and a run. So for our M, I'm going to start from the B. We start from the y-intercept. We don't go back to the origin. We don't go anywhere else. Remember, the y-intercept is our beginning. Okay, B is for begin. So I'm going to go from our beginning, which now is -3 on the y-axis. I'm going to rise 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to run 3. And there's my point. Now I put little dots on the way. You don't do that. Okay, we're not going to draw a horizontal and vertical line. Those little dots are just so that you can see where I've gone. Okay. You'll use your pencil and just tap on the paper to get yourself up and over. So my rise was 4, my run was 3. If you don't see that and you don't see it on your paper, pause for a second and count that out on the page. Okay. So now if I take my pencil and I connect my points, there's my line. Let me actually make an actual line. There you go. All right. Next one. Y equals -5x plus 1. I already have addition, so there's nothing for me to change. My slope is -5. My y-intercept is 1. So we start at the beginning, or the B. My B is 1. Now my slope is -5. If you need to, create a fraction so that you see the rise over run. You may not need to make that a fraction for yourself. That's more of a notation that you may want to add just to make sure everything's clear. But that's totally up to you. So from my B, from my point at 1, I'm going to rise and run -5 over 1. Okay. Now, just a little side note about our negatives. As long as one of these movements is negative, I'm okay. So I could either rise down 5 and run to the right 1, or I could rise up 5 and move to the left 1. And I'm going to show you both. So if I want to have -5 as my rise, I would go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the right 1. So this would be an option. Or color coding this for you. If I would rather have my run be negative, I go back to my beginning, my B, which is y equals 1. And I would rise 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I would go backwards 1. Now I'm off the grid, so this probably wasn't the best choice, but I still want to show you that the line would be correct. I still end up with a line. Oops. There we go. And it is kind of hard to tell, but if our graph paper went up that high, it would be correct. You may need to use that information depending on where your y-intercept is. If you can't rise and run the way you want, you might need to adjust a little bit. Let's take a look at another one. My slope is 5/2. My y-intercept is 5. So remember, my y-intercept is where my line crosses the y-axis. It's where I begin. So I'm beginning at y is 0, 5. Remember, we can write these as ordered pairs as well. Okay, that 5 is actually a point on our line. Now my slope is 5/2, which means I rise 5 and I run 2. But if you notice that this is really bad, there's no way I can graph this next point if I try to rise 5 and run 2, because I'm completely out of graph paper. I can't even kind of figure it out. So here's what happens. I want you to look at this for a minute. Is -5/-2 equivalent to +5/+2? I hope you said yes. Think about this for a second. Is a negative divided by a negative a positive? It is. If I have to, my rise and run can both be negative, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay? If you think about it like this, 5/2, my rise is positive, my run is positive. So I'm technically going to be going the same direction as if my rise is negative and my run is negative. I'm going in both the same direction. Okay, let's check this out and see. If I go down 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I go to the left 2, 1, 2. Let me plot this point. I want you to look at something. Don't write this down on your paper, just watch. If I wanted to go from the red point to the blue point, do you see how my rise is 5 and my run is 2? That's my slope, 5/2. So technically, I didn't do anything crazy or magical or out of the ordinary. I just manipulated the rise and run and rewrote it using math to end up getting what I needed. So again, if the rise and run if you can't make the next move the way you want to, you really have to think about the positives and negatives to make sure you can make it happen. Next one, y equals -3x minus 1. I'm going to go ahead and add the opposite. Oops, that was not good. Let's not do that. Y equals -3x plus -1. My slope is -3. My y-intercept is -1. So again, our y-intercept is where we start. It's our beginning. And if I need to, I'm going to put my -3/1 just so that I can see my rise and my run. So I'm going to rise -3, so I'll be going down 3, 1, 2, 3. My run is +1. And I connect my points to make my line. All you need are 2 points. If you would like to continue the rise and the run a few times to double check yourself, you absolutely could. You can try it forward and backward. You could go through and say, okay, well, let me try out that alternating the negatives for a second. Maybe I want to test this out just to know I can do it. I would go up 3, 1, 2, 3, backwards 1, and my line would go through that. And there you go. Just a little tweaking here. There. Okay, so feel free to practice even more on these graphs. All right, so now here's last chapter, but I did this on purpose. I want you to rewrite this equation. If I forced you to add a number to this equation that wouldn't change anything, think about what number can you add to anything that does not change it? 0. Let's just do that for a second. The m would be 4. My b would be 0. So my y-intercept, my beginning is at the origin. And if you think about the equations we did last chapter that look like this, didn't they all go through the origin? They totally did. So we've been graphing things like this all along. You didn't realize it. So if all else fails and you see these types of equations and you get nervous and you forget what to do, add 0 to the end, force it into the y equals mx plus b format. So add a 0 to the end, and then continue the way we have been to graph these equations. My y-intercept is 0. My slope is 4. So I'm going to rise 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and run 1, and connect my points in a line. And that's it. And that's what we did last chapter. We clicked at the origin, we rose 4, we run 1. Easy. Last one. And I don't know what that is there. Let's fix that. Okay. All right, so last one, I want you to try this on your own. I want you to graph this, hit pause, identify the slope, identify the y-intercept, and then I want you to graph it, and then hit play, and let's see how you did. Okay, so your slope is negative 1/4, and your y-intercept is 2. Let's plot a point at 2. Now for the slope, I could either have had negative 1 over positive 4, or 1 over negative 4. We're all talking about the same exact thing. So from here, I could rise negative 1, so that's going down 1, and run positive 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I could have had my point here. That's this one. Or, if we want to look at it like this, from my b, from my negative 2, I would rise up 1, and then go to the left 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So match up and see which way did you go? Which rise and run did you use? Or which number did you assign the negative to? Either way, we will still get the correct answer. Your line would look like this. And that's it.